Hi guys, it's Mark Law, creator of Rational Wine, Consult Wine, 7 Key Wine Concepts. In this video, we're going to talk about grape varieties. This is a very big topic because there are thousands of different grapes grown around the world that eventually become wine. Each of these grapes will have their own unique character profile, and even the same grape grown in different places will express themselves differently. So we're not going to have time to cover all of these grapes individually. We're going to have to set some boundaries. What I will do is cover the most widely grown and commercially available grape varieties used in the world. These are the ones that you will most likely come across when you walk into a wine shop or a wine bar or a restaurant. I will cover white grapes followed by red grapes, roughly in order of how much of it is planted in the world based on the data that I could find. I'll mention the main countries and regions where these grapes are grown, and in terms of flavors and aromas, I'll cover the primary characters mainly. Secondary and tertiary I'll mention incidentally, but that's just going to be a bonus. I'll provide a timestamp at the end to each of these varieties discussed. Feel free to look at that in the descriptions and click and fast forward to the ones that you're interested in. Let's get started. First up is Chardonnay. This is a very important grape. You pretty much find this grown everywhere that wine is made. Let's start with France, mostly found in the Burgundy region in France, also in the Champagne region as well. Also down here in Australia, this one here is an example from Margaret River in Western Australia. You'll find a lot of Chardonnay in the United States, especially in California, followed by Italy. You've got Chile, South Africa, Argentina, Spain, New Zealand, Germany. Basically, this is a grape that's not very picky about where it's grown. And that's very different from some of the other grapes I'll talk about later in this video. It also comes in many different styles, so if you are a bit picky about the types of wine that you like to drink, you would need to be a bit careful when choosing a Chardonnay. Many years ago, it was very fashionable to make wines that were very ripe and oaky with a lot of toast and butter, because that back then the philosophy was more is better. These days, winemakers are pulling back and making more lean and restrained examples of Chardonnay. If you think back to the primary characters in white wines, we've got tree, citrus, stone, and tropical fruits. It is possible for Chardonnay to hit all those points. But the rule of thumb is if the Chardonnay is grown in a cooler region, the flavors you'll find will lean more towards that citrus and tree fruit spectrum. On the other hand, if that Chardonnay is grown in a warmer area, then the resulting wine is going to taste a bit more stone and tropical fruit, a bit more ripe and juicy. So you might not enjoy all styles of Chardonnays, but there is a style of Chardonnay for everyone, and not just styles, there's a huge range in price as well. So go out there and explore and see what you enjoy. Next is Sauvignon Blanc, often referred to as Sauv Blanc for short. It's found in a lot of places as well. So let's start with the Loire Valley and Bordeaux regions in France. It's a very big deal in next door New Zealand and in the United States, especially in California once again, and Chile, South Africa, and we've got a bit of Sauv Blanc here in Australia as well. In terms of flavors, you'll find that Sauvignon Blanc leans more towards the tropical category. Think passion fruit, pineapple, gooseberry, guava, melon, but keep an eye out for the other categories as well. It might have a bit of an overlap in the stone, tree, and citrus there, but tropical is where it really shines. Something else you might notice in Sauv Blanc is a very green character. It's often compared to bell pepper or capsicum, freshly cut grass, jalapeno, asparagus. In my experience, all these fruit and savory characters are very much pronounced in these New World examples, especially coming from New Zealand, and I think a lot of people enjoy that intensity because it just pops out right in front of them. Others might be put off by that power and pungency, in which case they might be happier with the more restrained examples coming from the Old World, for example in Sancerre in the Loire Valley in France. Next we have Riesling. This is a little bit more picky about where it wants to grow. You'll find it in the cooler regions of the world. You'll find a lot of Riesling planted in Germany, in the Alsace region in France, and also in Austria. outside of Europe. There's a lot planted here in Australia and also some in the United States as well. In terms of flavors, you'll find that Riesling leans more towards the citrus end of the spectrum, a bit of overlap in the tree fruits, think of green apple, and when there is stone and tropical fruits, it's often very underripe. Think of green pineapple and green mango. Another interesting thing about Riesling is that it might show some characters that remind you of petrol or kerosene or lighter fluid, especially in the age examples. I like to compare it with oak in Chardonnay. Some people love oak, some people not so much. So in Rieslings, that petrol and kerosene component, some people like it, some people not so much. So give it a try and see how you go. Another thing I like to comment on is that German Rieslings, they do have a reputation for being sweet, and it's not untrue, but these days the higher quality examples are quite well balanced. They have that acidity which helps to wash away that sweetness, so it's not sticky, it's not cloying, it's very refreshing. So I do encourage you to give those a try and see what works for you. Next we have Pinot Grigio or Pinot Gris. These two names actually refer to the same grape variety from the standpoint of genetics, but in terms of style, there can be a huge difference. You'll find a lot of Pinot Grigio coming from Italy. There's also a lot grown in Alsace in France, and that's where it's more often labeled as Pinot Gris. It can also be found in Germany, in the United States, New Zealand, even some in Australia as well. In general, if you do see on the label that it says Pinot Grigio, this is typically a style of wine which is lighter, it's less ripe, it tends towards the citrus and tree fruits end of the spectrum, and just a little overlap into the stone and tropical perhaps. But it's more likely that it will be a bit more underripe and more in the background. Think about white peach and melon if that does occur in the wine. In fact, it's pretty much defined by its lack of intensity, which partly explains why it's popular with a lot of people, because it's inoffensive and it doesn't conflict with a lot of people's palates. On the other hand, you've got Pinot Gris, and these are typically more ripe, and the flavors are centered on riper tree and stone fruits. Think of red apple and nectarine, and even a larger overlap into the tropical category like pineapple, melon, even banana peel. Compared to Pinot Grigio, Pinot Gris typically comes across as more intense. Next we have Chenin Blanc. There's a massive amount planted in South Africa, also a respectable amount in the United States, but when we're talking about the fine wine examples, we are thinking more of the Loire Valley region in France. It might not be as widespread as Riesling, but I feel that Chenin Blanc does share a lot of characteristics with it. It can be quite citrus and tree fruit focused, with some overlap into the stone and tropical fruits. Chenin Blanc can also be bone dry, or it can show a bit of sweetness as well, depending on what you see on the label. How you might distinguish Chenin Blanc from Riesling is more the secondary and tertiary characters you'll find. Terms often associated with Chenin Blanc include almond, walnut, cheese rind, damp straw, wet wool, white mushrooms, even some tea notes like chamomile tea or jasmine tea. The last white grape I want to talk about is Semillon. You'll find this mostly growing in the Bordeaux region in France and also here in Australia. Very different styles of wine you can expect. In the Bordeaux region, Semillon is typically made into a sweeter style dessert wine. Think of dried apricot, candied citrus, preserved pineapple, very sticky and rich wines. On the other hand, quality examples of Semillon coming from Australia, they're typified by what comes out of the Hunter Valley region, and if you've been to Sydney, it's just about a 2-hour drive up north from there. These Semillons are not sweet at all, they're bone dry. In terms of complexity, it starts to really show a lot more after about 5 or 10 years of age. With fruit, it leans more towards citrus and tree fruits. Think about dried lemon peel and green apple. Then as it develops, you'll get a bit more of a grassy tone, dried hay, a bit of a candle wax, a bit of nut and toast. And this is a bit surprising because typically there's no oak used in the winemaking here. So it's quite surprising to see that complexity coming out of a wine where not a lot has been done to it compared to some of the other varieties I've talked about. This is a way to see that Semillon can be quite good value. I should also mention that Semillon presents one of the few examples where blending between varieties can occur as well. You might come across a bottle of wine that says Semillon Sauvignon Blanc, and this is a very common blend between these two varieties because together it brings more complexity and balance, and these are things that the wines individually might lack, and because of that it can also be kept at an affordable level as well. But it's just a distinction to keep in mind. Single variety and blends, one is not necessarily better than the other, they're just different. This video is turning out to be a lot longer than I expected, so I'm just going to stop right there. I'll talk about red wine varieties in my video next week. Even with white wines, I've actually skipped a lot. I didn't talk about Albariño from Spain or Gruner Veltliner from Austria, unfortunately, but I hope this information will give you a little bit of guidance when it comes to exploring white wines. I am going to include a link to a list of grapes for you to explore later on. This is also something that I've used in my studies when practicing tasting for exams. So have a look, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you next week.